So if you play Path of Exile and you go and you look up build guides and you see what build am I going to play for 3.17, better go look at a bunch of YouTube videos and watch some people on Twitch and go check out the forums and see what everybody's talking about. Most likely there is a chance that you are at least considering one of two very powerful but very new meta builds. Now, up front, I want to say that both of these builds are very, very good builds. However, both of these builds have problems. They're not exactly similar problems, but they do have problems. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people who are just going to be like, ooh, good build, many views, open it up, grab the POB, not read anything, start trying to level it, and just be massively disappointed. So this video is going to try to help you hopefully alleviate a few of those problems by either making you make another decision or to actually go in, use your brain, read in the POB, watch the videos, and make sure that you actually do everything that you're supposed to do. Because if you don't do that, you're probably going to have a bad time on at least one of these. Now, which builds am I talking about? I am talking about Spectral Helix in all of its varieties, as well as Explosive Arrow Ballistas. Now, I want to begin with Explosive Arrow Ballistas, because this one I wasn't expecting initially until we saw the patch notes and, it got the big buff, and then a bunch of people started talking about it, particularly Palsteron as well as Tuna. Now, once again, these builds are both very, very solid. However, I do think that there's a couple issues that aren't going to affect very good players or aren't going to affect people who are ready for them, who invest the time to look into the builds to see what the options are to fix these. But if you're part of the mass of people who really doesn't know that much about Path of Exile or who doesn't spend time actively trying to make sure that you're playing these builds properly, this may not be the build that you want to play, and I'll kind of explain to you why. So one major problem with EA Ballistas is that there are a bunch of pitfalls that you can fall into on this build. There is a lot of little things that you need to get, tons of tertiary stats, like you need to make sure that you're capping accuracy, you have to make sure that you have good chance to ignite, you have to make sure that you're not getting added damage to fire so that you're not bricking your elemental equilibrium. There's lots of little things like that that can cause problems. Another issue with the build is that there isn't really, as far as I can tell, and if I'm wrong here, let me know down in the comments because I'd actually like to, talk about it if I'm wrong. I can't see very much recovery in any of the EA Ballista builds that I've looked at. I've looked at Tuna's, I've looked at the one that Zai made that Zizarin posted, I've looked at Palsteron's, and I've looked at a couple other people's builds. I don't really see any recovery. I see Life Flask and maybe a little bit of regeneration. So one thing in Path of Exile that I think a lot of people get wrong, specifically newer players, is that when they think tanky, they're actually thinking that the build has good recovery. That's what they're thinking of. Tankiness is the ability for the build to walk up to big scary Demon Man punch you in face, and you take not enough damage to pop up the little screen that says you have died. That is what tanky typically means. What recovery is that if you're running through a map and you're just walking through like 800 minions monsters and, they're all just like doing little ping damage at you, or maybe you just walk in the big bad bosses like stuff on the ground, or you're getting hit by abilities or this or that, that is typically countered by recovery. It's making that little red health globe at the bottom left go back up after it's gone down. And this build doesn't really have very much of that, so do be aware. Totem builds are a little notorious for this sometimes in that they never really are up front taking the damage anyways, because you have a bunch of totems around you taking aggro and doing the damage. You don't really have to worry about it, but a lack of recovery might make some of the new bosses a little painful for people who aren't too experienced piloting builds. Another issue that I saw with the build is mana. It seems that mana is mainly covered by mana regen, which is fine, but you need to kind of have an idea of how to not just constantly spam the totems on the ground and, just potentially run out of mana, especially on bosses, if you're trying to set a whole bunch of totems down at one time. I think that Tuna, I could be wrong here, covers this with like Vault Clarity, which is a good option. You could also use like a mana flask or something like that. But do keep in mind that if you're reserving a ton of your mana and you don't really have a way to reduce the cost of your spells, mana can be a little bit frustrating for some players, so do try to keep in mind ways that you can fix your mana if need be. And the last thing, and probably the most important thing, and this goes for both of the builds that I'm talking about, EA Ballistas as well as Spectral Helix, these are builds, particularly Spectral Helix here though, these are builds that you genuinely might just really not enjoy. They're very particular builds with very specific playstyles. Spectral Helix is a super jank feeling ability. It really just feels wrong at first. And EA Ballistas is a totem build, and a lot of people don't like totem builds because of the way that they function. So I would heavily suggest, if you are a player who has started even in the last couple of leagues, if you did not start the game like pre-313, I would say at least go into the game and like respec a character in standard if you haven't already, or level up a character. Spend just like an hour or two actually trying these abilities and make sure that you don't hate them before you go in and try to league start with them and get really upset and quit the league for good, because they are a little bit weird on the playstyle front. That's enough about EA Ballistas. Let's talk about Spectral Helix. So there's a couple flavors of Spectral Helix going around. There are Jungrone's 2 builds, which is a poison variant as well as an elemental variant. Both of these builds are really solid, and as far as I can tell, there are no gaps really in any of the like recovery and defensives and all of that. The main criticism that I have of Spectral Helix is that the ability feels really janky to play. This is either going to be one of those builds that you absolutely love, or a build that you cannot stand, and playing it will make you want to quit the game. There's typically no in between. Now, coming from someone who has played this ability, I did try out a Spectral Helix League starter, doing an Impale Champion version, kind of similar to what Alkaiser played, but a little bit more softcore friendly. And the ability does grow on you. I will say that as you start to learn how the ability works and you get more comfortable and trust the ability a little bit more, it does get better. It doesn't feel as bad as it does right when you start, because when you start, it feels really terrible in my opinion. So I would say that this ability, as long as you feel that the gameplay style fits you and it is okay, I would say that it's probably an excellent league starter. Both of Jungrone's builds are really solid. They've got good defensive layers, got good recovery, good damage, doesn't cost very much, has good opportunity to scale. And then of course, the Impale Spectral Helix one doesn't scale as well, but has very good defensive layers as well through like Fortify and Armor and all that kind of good stuff. But there is another version that isn't being talked about as much, which is like a big Paradoxica block max resistance version that is pretty solid, but that's going to take quite a bit of gear, so that's not really a league start version. You can transition into that later if you want. But I'm serious when I say, before you league start and try out one of these abilities, go give it a throw in standard and make sure that you don't hate the playstyle. The build is perfectly fine. There's no holes in the build that I can find, except for the playstyle. So that's going to be it, boys. Both of the builds are perfectly fine as long as you're okay with all the things that I said in here. And shoutouts to Palstron, Tuna, Jungrone, as well as Zai, who made the POB for Zizarin's video. And remember, boys, if you're enjoying all the content or this video helped you out, make sure to give it a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that little notification bell for more content similar to this, and stay safe out there in Rayclass. And I'll see you guys in the next video.